August 10, 1944. Over the skies of Kyushu, Japan. 31,000 feet above the clouds. The air was thin, biting, almost metallic. The altimeter needle trembled as Lieutenant Saburo Takeda's Ki-84 Hay-8 fighter clawed its way upward, its Nakajima engine screaming under the strain. Below him, the island's darkened landscape stretched toward the horizon, broken only by the faint orange glow of burning industrial zones still smoldering from last night's raid. Ahead, through his frost-speckled canopy, Takeda saw them, a formation of silver leviathans slicing through the stratosphere. The Americans called them superfortresses. To Takeda, they looked like ghosts of steel, unreachable and unshaken by anything Japan could send against them. He pushed the throttle to the firewall. The Hay-8 bucked, its engine coughing as it struggled to breathe at 30,000 feet. The airframe rattled, the oxygen mask hissed in his ears. His gloved hand tightened on the stick. Every Japanese pilot knew the stories, the B29s flying too high, too fast, and too far. But this time, Takeda would see for himself. Down below, anti-aircraft guns opened up with rhythmic fury. Black bursts of flak erupted in the sky like angry blossoms, their shockwaves briefly shaking his wings. But the B-29s flew on, their massive wings gleaming in the moonlight, steady as if untouched by the chaos below. Enemy bombers at 11 o'clock. Altitude, 31000. The voice crackled in his headset, Captain Nakamura from the 244th Sentai, Takeda's commanding officer. Climb and intercept. Do not let them reach the target. Takeda spotted the bomber stream, a long chain of dots moving west to east, perfectly aligned, perfectly disciplined. He felt the heat rise in his chest. Japan's cities were burning because of these machines: Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya. Entire neighborhoods reduced to ash. Factories that once built his aircraft now lay in ruins. He leveled out and lined up his gun sight. The Hay-8's nose dipped slightly as he tried to close the distance. The B-29s appeared slow from this distance, but he knew better, they were cruising at over 350 miles per hour. Every second, they pulled farther away. Takeda, watch your engine temperature. Nakamura warned. You'll blow it at this altitude. I see them, Takeda replied, breath ragged inside his oxygen mask. I'm going in. The lead bomber loomed larger now, silver skin glinting against the stars, the massive tail fin bearing a white letter inside a black square, T. He aimed for it, closing in from below and behind. Then the bomb bay doors opened. He watched, powerless, as dark shapes fell, one after another, tumbling slowly, then accelerating toward the earth. Seconds later, the horizon flashed. The shockwave came even at his altitude, a faint tremor through the air, followed by a distant, glowing inferno where the city of Yoda had stood moments ago. Takeda gritted his teeth. He'd been too late. He banked sharply, bringing his guns to bear. The rangefinder ticked down, 400 meters. 300. 200, he squeezed the trigger. Tracers streaked through the sky, arcing toward the bomber's belly. For a heartbeat, he thought he had hit it. Then the night exploded around him. A blinding flash of gunfire erupted from the bomber's tail, twin .50 caliber machine guns firing with terrifying precision. Bullets ripped through his left wing. The Hay-8 shuddered violently. Warning lights blinked across the instrument panel. He yanked the stick, diving away from the stream of tracer fire. How? He gasped. He hadn't even seen the gunner. Below, the fires spread. The bombers turned north, formation unbroken, their mission complete. Takeda's aircraft fell into a shallow dive, smoke trailing from a shredded wing. He leveled off at 20,000 feet, lungs burning, hands trembling. The radio hissed, static, distant voices, screams, then silence. He looked back toward the retreating dots glimmering in the distance. How do you fight a machine like that? He whispered. That night, as he limped back toward the airfield, the answer haunted him. Japan had faced many enemies, but never one so untouchable. The B-29 superfortress wasn't just a bomber. It was the beginning of a new kind of war, one Japan could no longer fight. August 11, 1944. Yaota Airfield, northern Kyushu. The morning haze clung to the mountains like smoke that refused to fade. Lieutenant Saburo Takeda sat beside his damaged Hay-8, still streaked with oil and punctured with bullet holes. Mechanics circled around the aircraft, inspecting the torn metal with quiet disbelief. The .50 caliber rounds had shredded the tail and left deep gashes in the fuselage, evidence of the power he'd faced the night before. Takeda removed his flight gloves, his fingers stiff and pale. He could still feel the vibration of the guns, the thunder of the B-29's return fire echoing in his skull. Every man in the 244th Sentai had similar stories now, encounters that ended not with victory, but survival. Captain Nakamura approached, holding a clipboard and a cigarette. "You're lucky you made it back," he said. "Two of our men didn't." He exhaled slowly, watching the smoke drift upward. "The B-29s don't even flinch anymore. Our guns barely scratch them." Takeda said nothing. His thoughts were still in the sky, chasing that formation of silver ghosts. Across the airfield, rows of Ki-84s and Ki-61s sat lined up like relics from another era. Mechanics worked tirelessly to refuel and rearm them, but everyone knew it was futile. Japan's air defense network was collapsing, radar stations bombed, fuel reserves dwindling, and new pilots arriving with barely 50 hours of flight time. That afternoon, Takeda was summoned to a debriefing in a dimly lit operations room. The air smelled of kerosene and sweat. Maps of Japan covered the walls, dotted with red pins marking recent bombing targets. At the center table stood Major General Tanaka, head of local air defense command. "The Americans have begun a new phase," Tanaka said, his tone grave. "These B-29s operate beyond the range of most of our fighters. They climb to altitudes over 30,000 feet. Our anti-aircraft guns can barely reach them." He gestured to a grainy reconnaissance photo, a formation of B-29s cruising above a sea of clouds. "Each carries 12.50 caliber machine guns," he continued. "Computer-assisted fire control. The gunners are linked by an analog system that calculates range and lead automatically. Even a single bomber can defend itself like a battleship." Takeda leaned forward, studying the image. The B-29 looked impossibly sleek, its wings smooth and expansive, engines massive and efficient. "For right are 3350 duplex Cyclone engines," he recalled. Each one produced more power than the entire Ki-43 Hayabusa that Japan had used just 2 years earlier. "How are we supposed to reach them?" Takeda asked quietly. The room fell silent. No one had an answer. One officer finally spoke. "There's talk of ramming attacks," he said. "If we can't shoot them down, perhaps we can bring them down by sacrifice." The words hung in the air like poison. Takeda felt a chill crawl up his spine. He'd seen men volunteer for taco missions, desperate acts of valor turned into a last resort. But this was different. This was not a battle of courage, it was a battle of physics and technology, one Japan had already lost. That night, Takeda walked the runway alone. Above him, stars shimmered faintly through a thin veil of smoke drifting from distant fires. Somewhere far away, he could still hear the faint drone of engines, steady, unrelenting, impossibly high. The Americans called their bomber the Superfortress. And as Takeda looked up into the darkness, he understood why. For the first time, he realized that no matter how brave a pilot was, there were battles that courage alone could not win. The war in the skies over Japan was no longer about men and machines. It was about the future, and Japan was falling behind it. Late August 1944. Takiari Air Base, northern Kyushu. Rain drizzled over the hangars, the sound of droplets tapping against corrugated metal. The air smelled of gasoline and wet earth. Lieutenant Saburo Takeda stood beneath the wing of a captured B-29 wreck, one of the few that had crash-landed off the coast weeks earlier after a bombing run on Nagasaki. The massive fuselage loomed over him like the hull of a warship. Its silver skin was torn and scorched, but still, it radiated an aura of indestructibility. Japanese engineers had cordoned off the wreckage, crawling through the twisted interior, photographing, sketching, and whispering in disbelief. Takeda watched as a team of mechanics dismantled the gun turret system. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a compact sphere of precision engineering. Inside were gyroscopes, motors, and a small sighting computer connected by bundles of wires. A colonel from the Army's technical division noticed Takeda observing. "You're one of the pilots who engaged these, aren't you?" "Yes, sir," Takeda replied. The colonel nodded. "Then you'll understand what we're up against." He pointed to the turret. Each gunner can operate multiple turrets using a central fire control system. The sight calculates lead angle, range, and target speed automatically, all powered by electrical servos. The Americans call it the Central Fire Control System. Takeda frowned. "So the gunners don't even have to aim manually?" "Not exactly," the colonel said. "They aim through a sighting periscope, but the computer corrects for bullet drop and target movement. Even at 600 meters, their accuracy is deadly." Takeda looked again at the gun barrels, twin .50 caliber Brownings, sleek and heavy, their muzzles still blackened. He remembered the hail of tracer rounds that had shredded his wing weeks earlier. Now he understood why the fire had seemed almost preternaturally accurate. Nearby, another engineer called out, "Look at this armor plating. It's thicker than anything on our bombers." They had peeled back a section of the fuselage to reveal reinforced panels around the cockpit and engine nacelles. Even the fuel tanks were self-sealing, lined with layers of rubber designed to expand and close bullet holes on impact. Takeda walked inside the wreckage. The interior smelled of burnt oil and metal. He ducked through the narrow passage until he reached the bomb bay, enormous, almost cavernous. Here, the B-29 could carry up to 20,000 pounds of bombs. He touched one of the bulkheads, feeling the cold metal under his glove. This was no ordinary aircraft. It was a factory of destruction built to cross oceans, climb above storms, and deliver death with mechanical precision. Outside, the colonel spoke quietly to another officer. "We can't build anything like this. Not with our current resources." "Then what can we do?" the officer asked. "Pray," the colonel muttered, half in jest, half in despair. Takeda emerged from the wreck, rain still falling lightly. The airfield stretched before him, rows of fighters, fuel drums, and the weary faces of men who knew the tide had turned. He thought of the engineers in Wichita and Seattle who had designed this monster. Men who had never seen the front lines, yet whose calculations had changed the very nature of warfare. That evening, in the barracks, Takeda sat with his logbook open. He sketched what he'd seen, the turret systems, the bomb bay, the engines. He wrote beside them. Impossible to intercept at altitude. Impossible to outgun. Impossible to catch. He stared at the words for a long time. Then he added a final line. But we must try. Because that was the unspoken rule among pilots of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service. Even when defeat was certain, they fought. Not for victory, but for honor, for their homeland, and for the faint hope that one lucky shot might change everything. Outside, the thunder rolled. Somewhere beyond the clouds, Takeda imagined the droning hum of another B-29 formation, already on its way. And as he closed his logbook, he wondered if Japan would survive long enough to learn how to fight them. March 9, 1945. 1:30 a.m., Tokyo, Japan. The night sky glowed orange long before the bombers appeared. From his cockpit, Lieutenant Saburo Takeda could already see the reflection of the flames dancing across the clouds. Below him, Tokyo, the beating heart of Japan, was burning. His Ki-84H shook violently in the turbulence. The air was thick with smoke and ash even at 15,000 feet. He could barely see his instruments through the flicker of firelight seeping into the cockpit. Radio chatter filled his headset, frantic voices calling for targets, for bearings, for help. But the sky was chaos. Dozens of bombers, too many to count, heading north, one pilot shouted. Takeda squinted through his fogged canopy. Above the smoke, he saw them. The B29s, hundreds of them, moving in perfect formation under the moonlight. They weren't at 30,000 feet this time. They were lower. Closer. And they were firebombing the city. The Americans had changed tactics. Instead of high-altitude precision raids, they now flew at night, low and slow, dropping incendiaries, napalm-filled canisters designed to ignite everything they touched. Whole districts vanished in sheets of fire. Wooden homes, paper walls, entire families. Takeda's radio crackled. All interceptors, climb to intercept. Protect the capital. He pushed the throttle forward. The Hi-8's engine roared, but the climb was sluggish, the sky filled with updrafts of heat and debris. As he gained altitude, the air shimmered like a mirage. Below, rivers of flame flowed through Tokyo's streets. And then the bombers came into view, rows upon rows of black silhouettes against a sea of fire. Going in. Takeda shouted. He dove toward the formation, cannon switches armed, tracers ready. He lined up on a B-29 flying alone at the edge of the stream. He fired. His 20mm shell streaked upward, striking the bomber's right wing. A puff of smoke erupted, not a kill, but a hit. For a moment, he thought he'd done it. Then the B-29's turret guns swung toward him. The sky erupted. Tracer fire shredded the air around his canopy, bright as lightning. One round smashed into his right wingtip, another tore through the fuselage behind his seat. He yanked the stick hard left, rolling to evade. The bomber stayed level, engines droning, as if mocking him. Takeda, break off. Captain Nakamura's voice cut through the static. You can't win up there. But Takeda didn't break off. He climbed again, looping behind another formation, the red glow from the burning city illuminating his instruments. All around him, Japanese fighters tried to break through, Ki-44s, Ki-61s, and Hayats clawing desperately upward. Some never made it. He saw one Shoki take a direct hit, burst into flame, and spiral downward into the inferno below. The B-29s continued undeterred. Bomb bay doors opened. Cylinders fell, tumbling lazily before erupting in clusters of fire that blossomed across the city. From 10,000 feet, Tokyo was no longer a city, it was a furnace. The Sumida River glowed like molten metal, reflecting the firestorms raging across both banks. The heat rose so violently that Takeda could feel it even at altitude. His cockpit temperature soared, sweat ran into his eyes. Command, this is Takeda, he said into the radio, voice trembling. They're unstoppable. Static answered him. No command. No reply. Only the endless hum of engines, a mechanical chorus echoing through the night. He circled once more, watching helplessly as the last wave of B-29s released their loads. The wind carried the fire northward, consuming everything in its path. By dawn, Tokyo was gone. Over 16 square miles reduced to ash. Takeda landed hours later at a secondary airstrip outside Utsunomiya. His aircraft's fuel tanks were nearly empty, his ammunition spent. As he stepped out onto the tarmac, he looked to the south. The horizon still burned, a crimson haze stretching as far as the eye could see. He realized then that the Americans had not just attacked a city. They had attacked the very will of Japan to fight. For the first time, the war no longer felt winnable, not even survivable. And as Takeda watched the rising smoke blot out the morning sun, he understood the bitter truth every Japanese pilot was beginning to accept. You could fight a man. You could even fight an army. But you couldn't fight a machine that didn't fear you. May 25, 1945. Hamamatsu Airfield, Central Honshu. The dawn came gray and lifeless, the sky heavy with smoke that never seemed to leave anymore. Japan's airfields were cracked, scarred, and half abandoned, ghosts of the empire's once mighty air power. Only a handful of aircraft remained serviceable, their paint scorched, their engines coughing with every start. Lieutenant Saburo Takeda stood beside his Hay-8, its fuselage patched together from parts scavenged off wrecks. The mechanics worked silently, knowing fuel was now rationed to drops. The once bustling hangars were empty. The air smelled of burnt oil and exhaustion. Word had come at sunrise, another wave of B29s was on its way. This time, they were heading for Tokyo again, what was left of it. The city had been rebuilt in fragments, only to be bombed again weeks later. The raids came now every day, sometimes twice a day. Takeda strapped himself in. The leather of his seat was cracked, the control stick sticky with oil and sweat. He looked down the runway, broken concrete lined with burned-out aircraft. It was no longer a question of victory. It was a question of whether he would make it back alive. Takeda, Captain Nakamura said through the headset. His voice was calm, too calm. We'll climb to meet them head-on. They'll be at 27,000 feet. Remember, don't stay still, move fast and fire once. Understood, Takeda replied. The Hay-8 lurched forward, its wheels lifting off the ground. He joined what was left of his squadron, 6 aircraft. 6 against over 100 bombers, each one a fortress in the sky. As they climbed through layers of gray cloud, the droning hum reached them first, deep, constant, unending. Then the bombers appeared, dark shapes against the morning sun. A formation stretching across the horizon, perfectly aligned. Takeda's breath quickened. He opened the throttle, diving toward the nearest cluster. His guns roared. Tracers flashed across the sky, cutting toward the B-29's silver flank. He saw sparks, a hit. The bomber wobbled, smoke trailing from one engine. Good hit, Takeda. He's burning. Nakamura shouted. But the victory was fleeting. The damaged bomber held formation, refusing to fall. Then the others opened fire. Dozens of tracers filled the air, a storm of light and death. Takeda rolled hard left, bullets slicing past his canopy. His ears rang, his heart pounded. Pull up. Pull up. Nakamura's voice screamed, then silence. Takeda looked around, but his commander's Hay-8 was gone. A flash below, a fireball falling toward the sea. For the next 10 minutes, Takeda fought alone. He dove, fired, climbed, and dodged, each maneuver pushing his aircraft closer to its limits. The B-29s flew as if guided by one mind, steady, coordinated, and merciless. Every time he came within range, a wall of gunfire met him. He saw another Japanese fighter explode midair, debris scattering like confetti. The pilot never had a chance to bail out. Takeda tried to close in on a lone straggler, its left engine flaming. He aimed carefully, his gun sight shaking with every vibration. His thumb pressed the trigger. Click. Empty. His ammunition was gone. The bomber lumbered past him, its gunners tracking lazily as if choosing whether to finish him off. But they didn't. They didn't have to. Takeda peeled away, smoke streaming from his exhaust, his engine coughing. He descended toward the coast, following the line of the bay. Behind him, the endless drone of bombers echoed like thunder, fading into the distance. He landed on an auxiliary strip, tires screeching against the cracked pavement. The Hay-8 rolled to a stop. Takeda sat in the cockpit, breathing hard, eyes fixed on the sky. He could still see them, the dots shrinking on the horizon, untouchable. That was when it hit him. The B29s were not just machines of war. They were symbols, of industry, of engineering, of a nation that had harnessed science to wage war from beyond reach. Japan, with its dwindling fuel, starving soldiers, and shattered factories, had no answer. That evening, as the sun set behind a haze of smoke, Takeda wrote one final entry in his flight log. The Americans have conquered the sky. Our courage cannot reach them. We fight still, but only against time. He closed the book and looked toward the darkening west, where the bombers had vanished. He didn't know that within months, the last act of the war would come not from the sky filled with bombers, but from a single flash of light that would change the world forever. August 6, 1945. Over Hiroshima, Japan. At 8:15 a.m., the sky was clear, a flawless blue, no clouds, no smoke, only the quiet hum of morning. Children walked to school. Factory workers began their shifts. Housewives opened their windows to let in the sunlight. And then, from that very sky Japan had long feared, came a single aircraft, sleek, silver, and solitary. Lieutenant Saburo Takeda, stationed hundreds of miles away near Osaka, had just finished inspecting a grounded fighter when the distant tremor reached him. The earth shivered, a low, unnatural rumble that rolled across the horizon. Moments later, a flash, a light brighter than the sun itself, bloomed to the west. Men on the airfield stopped in place, shielding their eyes. A column of cloud, white and black and orange, twisted upward into the stratosphere like a pillar of fire. None of them understood what they were seeing. None could. Hours later, word arrived: Hiroshima was gone. Not bombed. Not destroyed. Erased. Takeda stood in stunned silence as the report was read aloud. A single B-29, Enola Gay, had dropped one weapon, special bomb, they called it. The city no longer existed. Over 70,000 people were dead within seconds. He couldn't comprehend it. All his life, he'd fought to reach the enemy in the sky, to pierce their defenses, to match their machines. But this was beyond war. This was annihilation made effortless. He stared up at the empty blue. Somewhere out there, perhaps still returning to base, the bomber that had carried that weapon flew on, untouched, invincible. A single plane had achieved what thousands could not. 3 days later, the nightmare repeated itself over Nagasaki. Another flash. Another city. Another wound that could never heal. By August 15, the Emperor's voice filled every radio in the nation. His words, calm, distant, almost ghostly, confirmed what every Japanese soldier already knew: the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. It was over. Takeda sat beside his fighter for hours after the announcement. The Hay-8 stood silent, its once proud insignia faded by sun and smoke. The airfield was quiet now, no scramble orders, no sirens, no engines. Just wind, whispering across the empty tarmac. He thought of the first time he had seen the B-29, a silver silhouette against the stars, untouchable, unstoppable. He remembered the tracer fire, the sound of his own heart pounding, the helplessness of watching cities burn. And now, the final lesson had come: the war had not been lost in courage, but in progress. The Americans had mastered not just flight, but power itself. Takeda closed his eyes and listened to the silence. It was the same silence he had once felt high above Kyushu, after every battle, that haunting quiet that followed the roar of engines and fire. But this time, it carried something new. Finality. Days later, he was ordered to surrender his aircraft. The Hay-8 was to be grounded permanently, engines disabled, weapons removed. He watched as mechanics drained the last of its fuel, sealing the fate of Japan's once proud air force. As he walked away, Takeda paused to look back one last time at the fighter that had carried him through the sky, through terror, through fury, through the dying heart of an empire. And beyond that horizon, he imagined the silver wings of the B29s, still patrolling the clouds, the last giants of a world that would never exist again. Epilogue. In the years that followed, Saburo Takeda would tell his students, young pilots in a new Japan, that the B-29 was not just an aircraft, but a message. It had proven that wars would no longer be won by bravery alone, but by those who mastered innovation, logistics, and technology. The Americans didn't defeat us in the sky, he would say softly. They built a sky we could never reach. And though decades passed, he never forgot the sound, that deep, endless drone of engines over a burning world, nor the realization that came too late. Some enemies are not meant to be outflown. They are meant to be understood.